NJ.com and the Star Ledger welcome to the Rutgers Rant, your one-stop podcast for the Scarlet Knights, with your hosts Steve Politti and Rutgers insiders Brian Fonseca and Pat Lenny. Let's start chopping.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Rutgers Rant. Got a fun little show here. We're going to talk some Bill Belichick to my alma mater. I'm excited. My first question, as you guys might know, was what does this mean for the basketball team? It doesn't help. It doesn't help us get better at the front court. What are we doing? We'll talk about that later. We're going to talk a little football scheduling. But first, guys, we've got the Hardwood Classic. We've got America's foremost, 17th most fierce basketball rivalry right here at the Rutgers-Seton Hall, Rutgers. And Rutgers coming off a win over Penn State, looking more like the team we hoped they would be. I guess I got to start here with that, Brian. And I certainly shut the lid on the panic button after the Penn State win, but I'm still aware of where it is. Like, I'm not moving my hand too far away from that. Like, the win didn't. First half certainly looked great, but it did not ease all of my concerns. And mostly it comes back from still asking an awful lot of Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. 27 rebounds. The two of them had 39 points. I don't know. Am I wrong to think that is not really a sustainable formula?
Well, you better get used to it, because that's what this team, if they're going to have any success, is going to be, is that these guys have to pretty much do everything. They heard Steve Pikiell talk for weeks about they can't rebound, and they said, you know what? I'll do it myself. We need points. I'll do it myself. Pretty much soon enough, you'll see Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper combining for 10 blocks because somebody's got to defend the rim. So you know what? I'll guard the pick and roll and I'll block the shots. That's it's gonna have to be. But what I would say is that the first half, I thought this team was back. Like, this was the team I thought it could be. Everything was clicking. They were defending really well. The stars were scoring. Dylan Harper was hitting threes from the logo and just doing whatever he wanted. And then in the second half, all the concerns that you have kind of went back. I don't know if they relaxed per se. They were certainly a little less intense than the first half. Penn State kind of started falling back in. Rutgers missed free throws. Rutgers threw the ball away. Yeah. Rutgers made mistakes it didn't make in the first half. And I was reminded about a phrase Zach Martini said during the non-conference portion of the schedule, where they were winning these games, but not, dominantly against these small teams. He said, we haven't learned how to kill teams. That was an issue against the Monmouths and Merrimacks of the world. And it's a lot harder to do it, as you saw, against a good Penn State team. I think that's the gear. When Penn State had Purdue at home, they killed them. When Maryland had Ohio State at home, they killed them. They were up 40 points. They essentially destroyed Ohio State's will. I would have liked to see in the second half Rutgers kind of step on their necks and really, because they're up 2 points with 2 minutes left. That's a game right there. The 17-point lead you built is irrelevant. They certainly could have lost that game. And if they did, oh man, this would be a very different podcast.
We'd be mashing the hell out of that panic button, Pat.
It's amazing, man. You guys are just ready to just take that panic button and smash it over your heads every day.
Why have a panic button if you're not going to hit it, Pat? Why have it? Why even have it?
Unbelievable. So there are so many like, unlike football, this is a season that just goes on, and every day the overreaction and the underreaction is amazing to me. But I get it. I understand everything you guys are saying, but the up and down nature of this is starting to drive me crazy.
So you're just okay with what you saw, is what you're telling me. You were like, it's great, they're fine.
When you have the Dylan Harper leading the Big Ten in scoring, right? We lose sight of how good he is, and right, like Ace Bailey, like maybe because it's right in front of us, we forget that like these guys are absolutely incredible players, and on any given night, they're going to just do amazing things. So yeah, I know it's a long season. I know that's a terrible answer. Just let them do everything. But I think everything is okay. Everything is okay.
Everything's okay because they won the game.
Yeah,
they won the game. If they didn't win the game, everything would not be okay. There are a lot of games left. At some point, you run out of games to win. And at some point, you run out of margin for error, because as good as these kids are, at some point, I think they're going to have a bad game, right? And I just don't. The issue is that those guys are incredible. I don't know if everyone else is ready to kind of carry them the way they've carried everyone else.
And I think we saw that bad game at Ohio State, right? They had a horrible first half. They had 6 combined points in the first half, and it was just not good. Maybe that was just a little bit of an overreaction in the moment, a tough place to play on the road, the place they've never won. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
It's a sport. I just got to take a step back every now and then.
Totally. And you're absolutely right with that. I guess I just look at that and say, you barely beat Penn State at home. You had a double from both of them. I mean, they're not just good games. Oh, they're great. They're going to have good games.
Yeah.
I mean, 15 and 15 for Ace Bailey, 15 rebounds. That's incredible. I knew he could do it. Obviously, he's 6'10". I just didn't expect that to be his role. I think Rutgers is realizing it's got to be his role. And Brian, we talked about this, and this is my little my little side rant about this team. That it's the frustrating thing for me in watching them is that for years, like Rutgers always had these guys who had to claw their way up to this level, and like they would slice your Achilles with their fingernails for your loose ball, because that's the only way they knew to get there. And the Rutgers always was filled with these rosters, and that's why they won these games, 42-41 over the years, because they couldn't do this. They couldn't do all this great stuff. They couldn't hit 3-pointers. They couldn't they couldn't do any of the pretty stuff. Now they've got two guys who excel at the pretty stuff, and they just are dying for someone who's going to pound the court with both fists, Steve Wojciechowski style at Duke circa 1996, and play defense and man up and do the little things, the dirty things, the dirty work. I haven't seen that from this team.
I don't think you're going to see it. Caleb McConnell's not walking through that door. They just don't have the guys to do that. Now, they do have a guy like JaMychal Davis who had the surprise start. They put him on Ace Baldwin, and he did a decent job. I think Dylan Harper really helped out guarding him as well, but he did his job, kind of pestered him and made life a little bit difficult. And look, he's not going to be the guy that's
fouled the hell out of him.
Yeah. Yes. That's the other underrated thing about playing at home, right? That fans are like, oh, the crowd is great and influences the game. They certainly do, because that place was absurdly loud. The other thing is that the refs just swallowed their whistle.
Yes.
And when Manny Obole is blocking 3 shots, if he blocked those 3 shots in Columbus, he would have had 3 fouls and would sit in on the bench. And JaMychal Davis had 4 fouls. He probably would have had 70 if he was playing Columbus. Right. So that's the nice part about playing at home in the Big Ten. But yes, that's the kind of guy that you have defensively, a guy who's going to be pesky and run around and energetic. They don't have these long-armed, really ball-stopping defenders, and that's just not what they have. And the guy who is diving on the floor and doing all those dirty work, I think I've said this on the last podcast, is Zach Martini, who played 0 minutes against Penn State, right? Like he did not get off the bench for a coach's decision. He wasn't on the availability report because he just is not quick enough laterally, defensively, to make an impact that way. So
do you think that's a one-game thing for Martini, or is that a we're not going to see much of this kid?
I certainly think some of this stuff is matchup dependent, right? Like JaMychal Davis started because he was guarding a smaller guard in Ace Baldwin. He wouldn't start against Bruce Thornton of Ohio State, who's essentially a linebacker playing point guard. I think it's really matchup dependent. And if there's a slower opponent with a slower, smaller 4, I think Zach Martini can certainly play there. So I think it's more matchup dependent. And look, like Steve Pikiell's certainly showing flexibility in playing time. PJ Hayes played 4 minutes against Ohio State. He played 15 against Penn State, got 5 threes, hit 2 of them. That's 40%. It's pretty good. And just the fact he's taking the threes is encouraging. So I think that's a good sign that they're willing to kind of mix and match and try to find matchups. And he's no longer afraid of, this guy's got to play this many minutes or whatever. He's willing to sit a fifth-year senior who transferred into the program and not play the whole game. And I think it's a good sign that Martini probably took that in stride. Jordan Durkak took coming off the bench in stride. That's a good sign for team cohesion.
Right. Yeah. All right. And now they've got Seton Hall. Not a good team. That's the way you can put it. 5-5. Look like they're barreling to the basement of the Big East, and that's why they scare you. Right? It's like that's why they scare you. This rivalry, and I get it. Like there's not many things. It ain't pretty a lot. It ain't. It's not. It's not the colorful ESPN rivalry week and ain't Carolina Duke. I get it. It's not any of that. But the one thing these games do seem to always it doesn't throw the record out is a big cliche, but it's true with this two teams. The last 2 years, as Brian, as you pointed out to me on the phone the other day, the worst team won and essentially knocked the other team out of the NCAA tournament. Like if you looked at the resume, both those teams needed. Seton Hall last year won the NIT, needed probably one more win to get in, didn't get it against a bad Rutgers team. 2 years earlier, Rutgers should have you could make the case should have gotten in anyway, but certainly needed one more win. Didn't get it against Minnesota at the end of the season, but also didn't get it early on against the Pirates. I mean, is this another situation where Seton Hall's entire season is sort of rides on this game?
Yeah, I mean, they stink. They are horrible. They are worse in the net than Merrimack and Kennesaw State. Like they're one of the worst teams in Power 5, right? And to your point, like this rivalry is a lot different than it was 20 years ago, right? In a lot of ways, you don't have the guys that are here every year. Rutgers has 9 new players. Seton Hall has 8 new players. No one really. Dylan Harper understands the rivalry in the sense that his brother played in it, but no one really gets it. Yeah. And 2, these guys aren't competing for NCAA tournaments against each other, and it's not like both are trying to make it the tournament against each other again. They're essentially the seasons are coming down to spoiling. And like you said, the last 2 seasons there's been a spoiler. If Seton Hall somehow wins at the RAC on Saturday, Rutgers' season collapses completely. They have to do an insane number in the Big Ten. I'm talking 15 wins to make up for how disastrous that loss would be. So I think that's kind of motivation for Seton Hall, right? Because look, they're not going to make the tournament. They're just not. They're the only team in America that's lost to Monmouth, and Monmouth has played 70 games, right? So
Monmouth is giving its players away in the portal already.
Yes,
it's okay.
So like Seton Hall is bad. Their resume is bad. Their players are not good. They're not playing well. There's no sign here that they should have any hope. And if Rutgers to take a next step, they got to treat Seton Hall like a Monmouth, like a Merrimack, just destroy them the way that Rutgers in 2019 destroyed Seton Hall. They were up 25 or whatever at the first media timeout. You got to see a blitz like that from these guys and leave no doubt. If this game is close at the under 4 timeout of the second half, the RAC might be the tensest place in America. You cannot let that happen.
At the flip side of this coin, if there's one thing we know about Sheen Holloway, against odds,
always.
No chance he was going to beat Purdue in the elite, in the Sweet 16.
This guy is like one of the ultimate motivators and gets a lot out of his players, knows how to get them to rally in big moments. I think this is one of those pivot in the, fork in the road moments for Seton Hall, right? Like they have everything to play for in this game. Like Brian said, Rutgers has everything to lose in this game. And the one good thing, if you're a Rutgers fan, is that Seton Hall has just been really, really abysmal on the offensive end. And this is a game where Rutgers could probably just run up and down the floor. And right, like if you get to 75 points in this game, you're going to win, I think. Right. So that's what Rutgers has on its side. And just to talk about the rivalry a little bit, like it doesn't, right. When they were in the Big East, they're playing twice a year and competing and then probably playing in the postseason tournament as well. And right, you got those late game where it mattered so much, right? Like everything's on the line. There was great banter back and forth. Like the players really hated each other. So Brian's absolutely right from that aspect. Like it may not have the juice that it used to, but it's still it's still going to be heated. And obviously the fan bases don't like each other either.
It matters for the fans, and I think that's what makes that's what makes it a great road. It's not like there's a lot of history there. Been a lot of fun games over the years. I mean, Jared Carino has cataloged some of them. Some of them have been lucky enough to been at. But the ones, I mean, honestly, what makes this so interesting is not just like some 101 to 100 double overtime thriller. It's just been some of the crazy stuff that's happened, and that's why I love it. It's a Jersey thing. Like it's Gonzo, it's Bambi's on Ice, it's Fred Hill Jr., it's Marcus Toniel. It's just like if I could describe it to somebody, it's like a Taylor Hammond cheese sandwich, right? It's like a chef's kiss of Jersey craziness, Brian. I don't know. I get it. It's been diminished. I think the fact that Seton Hall, and for all of the talk about like Rutgers having trouble in the new age, I mean, Seton Hall and NIL, they lost that entire team, and I think they are in deep doo-doo, like going forward. The Big East, for that matter. I mean, this might be a quad 4 game forever, or a quad 3 game for a long time on the schedule.
I'm not sure about that. I think as far as the Big East, at least, like the Big East has brands. UConn is always going to be good. They have Creighton, which has essentially money growing on trees over there in Omaha. Like there are programs that will survive.
That's 2.
Fair enough.
St. John's is doing well.
St. John's is doing well. They've got money.
Right.
Right.
Yep. Look at the top 10. They're all SEC teams. I guess that's the broader point right now in college.
Yes, the football money is going to help the basketball programs of these other things. Yes, and whereas the Big East is going to have to get grassroots funding from the billionaires that went to their schools. Anyway, the Seton Hall, though, I don't see that anybody, kind of saving that program. I think they really are in a really, really tough situation. I feel for Shaw in that he's a great coach, came back to his alma mater, stayed there there was a lot of interest for him for other programs. Like the honorable thing and his reward is just getting, $2 to buy a Maserati, and everyone else is buying Maseratis, and he's having to, buy a bike essentially, right? Like, and he's doing what he can. He's trying to instill these guys to play the hard-nosed defense that he the foundation of his teams. And I think that's going to be evident on Saturday. I think they are going to play hard as hell and try to defend, the lights out of Rutgers.
Right.
They just can't score. They have nobody who could put the ball in the basket because that's what costs money in the portal. And they just don't, they're going to have to find diamonds in the rough. And Shaheen really, his first couple seasons had success because he had a guy in Kadari Richmond who he got convinced to stay. He helped recruit him there when he was an assistant, but that was a guy he convinced to stay. Alamir Dawes was a guy who kind of, floated around in Clemson, came back and had a good run. Like, they got to find diamonds in the rough, and they're not many diamonds in the rough these days.
He maximized what he had, the talent he had, and he got a lot out of that team. That team last year. I mean, we can dismiss the NIT, but it was a nice moment for that team to go all the way, to be the only other team other than UConn to win its last game.
Yeah.
Think about St. Peter's too, right? The roster he had there to beat Purdue. I mean, the centers were 6'6" playing against Zach Edey, right? Like, he maximized every single thing on that run as well, right? Like Doug Edert, of course, right? Like so beyond Seton Hall, he has a great resume for maximizing effort and potential and talent as well. So give him credit for that.
Which is why them being so bad this year is kind of stark, because you think that no matter what roster he has, he'd be able to do something with it. To your earlier point, Politi, I don't know if it'll be a quad 4 game forever. I think this is just a particularly bad season for Seton Hall. I just don't know if they'll ever be that high quad 1A they were with Miles Powell, for example. I think those days are probably going to be dime a dozen, a rarity, I should say.
Yeah. All right. Transition to football. We'll obviously we'll see what happens down in Piscataway. I'm looking forward to it. We'll all be there. But the football schedule came out this week, which was exciting to see. We knew the games, but it's nice to see them in order. Nice to know what we have here in the fall. Start booking some hotels. And my analysis was, given that I knew the teams, this was about as good as you were going to get for the Scarlet Knights. I kind of feel like it gives you an opportunity at least to start fast. Miami of Ohio, both good MAC teams, I guess, if you look at it that way. Norfolk
against each other in the MAC championship game. They faced off in the MAC championship game this year.
So we're going to hear a lot about the high quality of the MAC from Greg Schiano in August of 2025. Norfolk State, we're done with forever. As long as Greg's here, we're done with Virginia Techs and Boston Colleges and the fun games. But you get the scrimmage, then home against Iowa. Okay, beatable team. Granted, I say that even knowing that Rutgers hasn't beat them, but they've been close in some of these games. Maybe. All right. At Minnesota, at Washington, then it gets a little dicey. Home against Oregon, at Purdue, it should be a win. At Illinois, we know what that team is, versus Maryland, and then the big finish at Ohio State and versus Penn State. Rutgers 2025 playoff spoiler could be. What did you guys think of the schedule?
Yeah, you boil it down to like what is good for Rutgers in the long term, and where does this schedule fit in the grand scheme of the college football landscape, right? Like, after all the talk of the SEC and Alabama getting knocked out of the playoff, right, everything is going to be de-incentivized to play good out-of-conference games. It's just not going to happen anymore with these mega conferences. So if you're Greg Schiano and Rutgers, you're doing the right thing by playing Norfolk State and Ohio and Miami of Ohio, right? Like that's you're going to get a juggernaut schedule in the Big Ten. So you got to get 3 winnable games to start the year. I think that all makes sense. It's just even the difficulty of the schedule is just stark. That's what also hit me, compared to this season too, right? Like the winning percentage of the teams on this schedule is 729. which is really,
Wow.
and that's elevated because Ohio and Miami of Ohio had great records too, but still, like 9 bowl teams from this year. It's a much more difficult schedule, and as we talked about a lot this year, that Rutgers schedule in 2024 was not so tough. It was 73rd, ranked 73rd by ESPN in strength of schedule after being like top 5 for 3 years in a row or a long time in the Big Ten East. So yeah, definitely a stark contrast from this fall.
Much harder, which, not to beat a dead horse, is why you should have taken advantage of this season. Anyway,
beat that horse. It's like between that horse and the panic button, you have many things to beat, which is good. It's good. You get your rage out on the horse and the panic button.
I built a brand. I am the horse and panic button guy. A couple more things that stood out to me. The Cali McManus Bowl is earlier this season. They're going at the end of September. He gets to go back to Minnesota, which will be interesting. Just to be clear, Ethan Cali McManus, we all kind of expected it. He confirmed to us yesterday that he is coming back. That was the plan all along. Just nice to have confirmation of that. Obviously, a huge building block for this offense going forward. Kirk Ciarrocca should be back next year as well. He's expected, it looks like, to get an augmented salary at the next Board of Governors meeting next week. Not entirely sure if the length of the contract changes, if it's just salary. Don't have the details quite yet. I would imagine that after watching your defensive coordinator go away, and reportedly, according to our friends at Rivals, Kirk Ciarrocca interviewed for the Temple head coaching job. With all that happening, you'd want to kind of lock that guy down after they had the best offensive season at Rutgers in a decade.
Right. He already makes $1.4 million. What could that be? It's kind of fat. He's already one of the top 10, 15. At least he was
20. He was 27th among assistant coaches in college football.
Okay.
Harris Simiak made more than him last year, according to USA Today.
Okay. Right.
So take that for what it's worth. Kind of just keeping up with the Joneses these days. A lot of money being thrown around, but you earn it when you have, again, really, really good season, developed wide receivers, good offensive line, and have a quarterback that you brought in that has made Rutgers look competent offensively again. Anyway, another interesting thing, the bye week this year, there's 2 bye weeks again, but instead of having a bye week after the West Coast trip, you have a bye week before the West Coast trip. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think you'd probably want the bye week after to kind of get yourself back into, rested, but it is what it is. I do love that the Big Ten is doing Ohio State a favor. They have not won the game for 4 years in a row. So what's the best way to do it? An SEC style, the week before the game. Here's a game against Rutgers. Here you go. Just take it easy, then prepare for the Michigan game. It's not Rutgers of old. I certainly think the Big Ten still sees Rutgers kind of like that, the way they scheduled that.
I'm sure it's a coincidence.
Totally a coincidence that the biggest brand that whines more than any other team in the Big Ten suddenly gets a kind of a break in their schedule before the biggest game of the year. Anyway, look at the schedule itself. We knew, like you said, the teams they're playing, really hard games here. At Washington, brutal. At Minnesota, brutal. Iowa is going to be, their baseline is this, where they're going to be, if you beat them, it's going to be one of the hardest games of the year. Oregon is going to be insanely good because they might win the Natty this year and they have the best recruiting class in the country and they're going to spend $20 million on the portal. Illinois, hard because it's on the road and they're good under Brett Bielema. Ohio State is what it is. Penn State, is that going to be the signature win? Season-ending win over Penn State to keep them out of the playoff? That's what I'll say. A lot more signature wins on the schedule. A lot more signature win opportunities than this year. A lot harder path to make it to a bowl game. Let's do it this way. They're not going to make a bowl game in the last 2 weeks of the season. You have to make it in the first 10 games. I would say the 6th win at latest has to be Maryland, right? That's going to be the last opportunity to get 6th win.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
you can't bank on to going to Columbus for a win or beating Penn State for the first.
All we have to do is beat the Nittany Lions to punch our ticket to Detroit. Can you imagine? That's not. Yeah, well, that's not what you want. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be a lot harder. We always knew that. We talked about it. And I said this, this team could be better next year, and we won't see it in the record. And we won't see it, and we might not see it in the scores either. Like, forget, they're good. We got keep close games against. I mean, it's just these teams are juggernauts. Some of them are juggernauts. So that's just life in the Big Ten. This schedule's, I mean, you said it. That's what made this season so frustrating, is that you had a manageable schedule. You don't next year. I think right now, looking at it, 6-6 would be, tip your cap and you might sign for it. So, yeah.
To be clear, I'm not convinced next year's team is going to be better. They're losing practically their entire defense. That's going to be a lot to replace. But
they're returning their entire. They're returning their entire off. I think you want to play that game. The offense should be pretty good, right?
Let's discuss this in the spring.
Discuss this in the
spring.
spring.
To open this can of worms.
Yeah, we don't know.
The offense should be the offense should be great, but you're losing the guy that was the focal point of it. So I don't know.
Right. Okay, gosh,
and your left tackle,
guys, it's just depressing me. It's trying to be 6-6. I said something like, "Oh, it might be 6-6," and you went, "No."
Listen, we set very high expectations last year with the college football playoff. Let's try to pump the brakes this year. Maybe what's the saying?
6-6.
Sell low. No, you didn't. Last year you said 9-3, didn't you?
No, this year I just said they might do well to go 6-6. You said let's pump the brakes a little bit.
Yes, they're playing Oregon, Ohio State. All right, let's just what is it? Right. Sell low.
But this brings up a great point from earlier one of our earlier podcasts too, right? If you win one of those 3 games, it makes your season, right?
Yes,
like
of course.
That's your Vanderbilt moment that we were going back and forth on a million times too. So you get three chances for that.
Right.
To steal one.
All right. You get Oregon at home, you get Penn State at home. That's certainly better than going on the road. But we'll discuss this. Now, if we want to transition here about next year's team, talk about what they'll have. There's been some movement in the transfer portal, no commitments as we are recording. I think that will change soon today. But I think we can kind of glean on what positions they're targeting based on who they've offered, who they've welcomed on visits, and kind of just there. So a couple things. The most interesting to me is they've offered a running back out of Florida Atlantic. I think we've discussed this on the last podcast, the possibility of doing that because you are losing Kyle Monungai. And obviously the most experienced guy you have coming back is Sam Brown, who's been injury prone, and you have a lot of young guys behind him who are unproven. So maybe you want to add a running back. They offered a kid from CJ Saunders, I think his name is. I probably messed that up. But starting running back for Florida Atlantic had a big year as a rusher and as a passer. So that's also an interesting prototype they're looking at as a running back. They've welcomed a tight end, Colin Weber from Charlotte, on a visit. He was here for the basketball game Tuesday. Tight end clearly is a position. They're not losing anybody per se through the graduation or the portal just yet, but clearly you saw when they were banged up after Kenny Fletcher went down, the ability for them to impact the passing game was gone, right? So you probably want a guy alongside Kenny Fletcher who can be kind of a dual threat as a blocker and as a catcher. They offered a defensive tackle from New Jersey, from Paulsboro, whose name again is escaping me. I should have written these down. I apologize to the audience. But he kind of is a journeyman. He went to TCU, went to Monroe College for JUCO, went to USF. He's an older guy, 6'2", defensive tackle. So clearly, as we expressed, defensive tackle is a huge priority for this team. As of the time that we publish this, this will probably make me publish the podcast later in the day than I would hoped. But Rutgers is expected to sign, according to a source, James Madison, interior defensive lineman, Daryl Dingo. I can't really pronounce his name. He six tackles for loss and a sack last year and has 3 years of eligibility remaining. So productive young guy who has a lot of years left. And that to me would be a really solid building block for the first guy in the transfer portal. You add key position, proven production, long-term potential here at Rutgers. So good start, but that's kind of where the transfer portal is at this point through 4 days in. And they've lost nobody aside from, we didn't talk about this on the last podcast, Wesley Bailey. We can kind of debate here the impact of that, but
right. Yeah, absolutely. We saw with the Wesley Bailey thing coming. We knew that was, it was likely a guy who didn't quite live up to his expectation, couldn't stand the field. Yeah. They were going to have to upgrade the defensive line regardless, Pat.
Yeah, and Wesley Bailey had a very good Rutgers career, and he has an opportunity, right? He's at a premium position as a pass rusher, a guy that has great statistics, great potential, size, a lot of desirable characteristics that he can go out on the open market and make some money. And I think that's probably all the motivation he needed, right? He's accomplished a lot at Rutgers, and almost very similar to the Cliff Amore situation, where right, like he can do well here. International player as well. So, very, very similar to that. And I think this defensive line, big priority. And as Brian said, they're clearly addressing it early.
And
A couple things on Bailey, just really quick. Sorry. Rene Conga, fellow Canadian, worked with the same trainer, I believe, had the same path where he left Rutgers last year after being a rotational guy, went to Louisville, made some money, did not play as much, was on a more successful team, and made more money than he would in Piscataway. Wesley Bailey, coincidence or not, shut it down after 4 games, redshirted to preserve his last year of eligibility, and then entered the portal within 2 days of the portal opening. Listen, I believe the guy was banged up a little bit. I think that those things are all a lot of happening for it to be a coincidence. I think clearly the signs point to him kind of shutting it down to preserve his red shirt and be able to kind of cash in for 1 year of his last year of eligibility, which I don't blame him at all. I think it's pretty much a smart move personally. And if he ends up at Louisville, we can tell that he got the same advice and same path as Rene Conga. I think there will be some interest there in a guy that, yes, has not been on the field much recently, but has, as Rutgers fans have talked about for the past 3 years, a lot of potential, and somebody's going to think that you're going to unlock that potential in a veteran defensive end. So,
right. Yeah. It's a business. It's a good transition. Good transition to what I think we should talk about next. It's a business. Bill Belichick back in college football, because it is a business. And I kind of wrote about this morning. I don't know if I captured exactly what my thought process on this was. And the idea for me, I think this is a sort of a watershed moment we'll look back on and say, well, when did college football become a second NFL? That's what it's going to be. I don't even think you can call it like a minor or a smaller version of it because it's huge. When did it become a second NFL? Like, this might be one of those moments. Remember when Bill Belichick took the Carolina job? And I think that's because, and it's not, I get it. Like, it's not just because they're starting to pay the players now. They've been paying the players. I understand that. It's just this philosophical shift. This, like, we're done pretending. We're hiring Bill Belichick's on ESPN saying, I'm going to bring a professional model and develop players for the pros. He's not saying, I want to beat Duke. He's not saying, I need the ACC championship. He's not saying, we're gonna get these kids an education. None of this. It's all over all the nonsense. And a place, and again, it's not Alabama. It's Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It's Carolina Way, the Dean Smith family, all this stuff that I remember when I was there a million years ago, where it kind of carried itself like we do things the right way. Well, the right way is going to be the first hire is an NFL GM. I mean, the capologists, they've got a $20 million player budget now. Bill Belichick's 3 years, $30 million. I mean, the trustees are the ones making this decision. It's just the stuff that you see there. You're like, okay, that's where it's headed. And I think if it's happening in Carolina, and that's maybe it's just because, again, it's a place that I'm very familiar with. If it's happening there, I think this is college football now. And it comes back to the question: is Rutgers ready for this? And again, like not to be at that level, but this is the competition. This is it. I mean, Oregon, this is it. This is the world they're in. It's wild. What did you guys think when you heard this news?
Your thought process is exactly right. That you summed that up really well, right? Like, if this is that shift, this is absolutely like a watershed moment, like you said, to say, man, wow, Bill Belichick could have had any coaching job he wanted in the NFL and chose to do something completely different and be a leader and an innovator, right? That's something he's always been. He's always ahead of the game. It's been his reputation in the NFL. And in this sense, he's being ahead of the game in college football, right? Like, the things that Carolina will probably do under him will be transformative. And that's 100% the world that I mean, it's not like nobody saw this coming. It's not like Rutgers hasn't seen this coming. Right, so
of course,
like, everyone's been preparing for it. And next year, the doors are just going to get blown open, and it will be the second NFL. I think that's a really, really good. We have these secondary leagues, right? They're never going to make it. And college football is probably more popular now than it's ever going to be. And the playoffs just going to keep getting bigger and better. And the product's going to be just as exciting as the NFL.
Couple things. Bill Belichick stealing a book out of Greg Schiano's playbook, bringing a 400-page binder to his meeting with the UNC brass. Way to take one away. Greg Schiano's taking a lot from Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick got an idea from Greg Schiano there. So tip of the hat there. I love the more we can move away from the pretending that we care about student athletes and their academic achievements and the APR and graduation rates and all that malarkey is great. I think we can all realize that these guys don't come to play school, and I would bet that They take the minimal credits and school doesn't matter. So the more we move to the professionalization model, the more we get rid of the facade, the better for me. In an era where obviously money plays, right? You're going to have to pay these players to come. You don't have to recruit them at a high school and make them feel loved and all this stuff. What better recruiting pitch is there with, hey, man, you want to make it to the NFL? How about you come to North Carolina and get coached by literally the greatest football coach in the history of the sport? Bill Belichick, this isn't 2007, is not going to have to go to a living room in Birmingham, Alabama to get the 5-star defensive lineman in high school. He can get a transfer portal guy to come into his office because all of his front office staff, his GM, will take care of all that paperwork and all that recruiting stuff. All he has to do is sit him down in his office and say, you'll do this, this, and that in my defense. You'll do the same thing as Teddy Bruschi and all these great linebackers or whatever that I coached. And guys are going to say, well, if I want to make it to the NFL, this is where I got to be. I think it's a perfect match. The only issue to me is that he is 100 years old and he's only going to be there around for so long. His girlfriend may be young, but she can only keep him so young. So I think this will be a short-term solution. I wonder what's next for UNC. I will say this. UNC had this opportunity. They absolutely had to take it. I am fascinated at what's going to happen. People compare this to Deion Sanders. I think it's a completely different thing here. And I am so excited to see how it happens. And I'm so excited to see how North Carolina's press corps is very good. Like Inside Carolina is maybe the best like local beat writing college site in the country. I am fascinated to see how he deals with the press after essentially pushing the NFL guys aside.
There's a million things. There's a million things that's going to make it fascinating. The fan base. I mean, again, I can't I joke about, they care more about basketball down there. It's just true. It's just a fact. There's so many things that and I disagree with you. I think it could be a spectacular failure. And because of a lot of things, let's not forget that Bill Belichick wasn't a great, you lost Tom Brady. Now you're relying on those, your expertise as a personnel guy. The Patriots are still a hot mess because of him and what he left behind. He was not a good coach at the end of his career. If anything, that's why he didn't get an NFL job, because people they saw that and they saw what he was to deal with. He brings a lot of, he's going to do it his way. He's a tough person. And I think a lot of NFL owners didn't want to deal with that. Now you're inserting him in a place where I think they still have professors and they still have, a university president and they still have boosters, and he's going to answer to all these people. That's still part of the job. Glad handing alumni. It's the one thing Mac Brown did well. It's that's still part of the job. Dealing with this 19-year-old whose, girlfriend broke up with him. It's still, I know it sounds crazy.
He can relate to that.
That's the one thing he can relate to.
That's the one thing. He's the preeminent college coach in understanding what it's like to deal with a young woman in college. No other coach in college understands that.
He's going to be handing out Viagra to the players when they come in for advice.
He understands what it's like to walk out on a Sunday, take the walk of shame, and that Ring doorbell catches you with your shirt off. Nobody understands that better than Bill Belichick. So I think that's a huge advantage.
And that might be the one way some of these players know him. They don't, think about it. Some of these 18-year-olds, they know Bill Belichick. Oh, that's right. He's the guy who's, that might be it. It's kind of funny when you think about it, but
he might have the hottest girlfriend in the locker room. How about that?
Wow. That's so
sorry. I'm done talking about Bill Belichick's girlfriend.
Keep going. What? It's good. It's good content. And I'm ready to be wrong about this, by the way, but and it's still a situation where you can't lose 2 games there. I guess you can, but it's what happens if they're in the freaking Pop-Tart bowl? He's hugging a freaking walking toaster strudel, Pat. I mean, that's not a success, but Carolina, that's been the bar. That's all they've done for forever.
Before what happened with SMU, right, and the playoff this year, right, it kind of worked in the ACC's favor, getting Clemson in. That they got 2 teams, whatever. What is the future of the ACC, and how much does this impact it? Right,
great question.
Does it become a more attractive brand for Big Ten to poach or SEC? Right, it's clearly the Board of Governors and higher ups in North Carolina saying maybe this will help. Help us if that's the way we want to go. This might be the final push we need to get out of the ACC.
Yeah,
to your point,
that's a great point.
It was the Board of Governors that really pushed this higher. The athletic director did not want it, apparently, from reporting I've heard on
absolutely true.
So that's certainly an interesting point. Can coaches opt out of bowl games? I know players do. If they make it to the Pop-Tart Bowl, there is no way Bill Belichick is hugging that Pop-Tart. If they make it to the Charlotte Mayo Bowl, Bill Belichick would die before he gets a bucket of mayo dumped on his head. So can coaches opt out? Is that possible?
That's the only good. That's what the world needs that to happen. We need him covered in Duke's mayo, the world's worst condiment, after beating back. Could be. I could be playing Greg Schiano and the Scarlet Knights. Wouldn't that be something? That'd be amazing. Yeah, and to your broader point, it's funny, and I was thinking about this too. So many different permutations, but like Greg Schiano talks about this all the time, like this, like you need synergy, and he brings up this I gotta have it. We have it with the board of governors, we have it with the university president, we have it with the athletic director. Okay, he didn't say that. I'm just pretend he would have said that if he actually had it with the athletic director. But like he talks about this world where these things have to be aligned.
The vertical alignment.
The vertical alignment. Carolina's a hot mess. You got this guy Bubba Cunningham in his tie, and he's the old school athletic director, and he stands there in his blue blazer, and then you've got these board of trustees who are like, screw that Carolina way. We're spending $30 million. We're going to beat Alabama. It's just amazing. Like the university president who's barely involved. The whole thing is just a mess. And I do wonder about that. Like, all right, so at one point do you just cut this all? The football is just like its own thing now, or is the university going to push back and try to take control of it again? Utterly fascinating.
Yeah, very fascinating.
Bubba is a great name for a Southern AD.
Of course he is. He's an AD. Absolutely. What else could he be? He was born to be an AD, Bubba Cunningham.
At a Southern school.
At a Southern school.
He's not going to be the AD at Ohio State. And two, Carolina wins in literally every sport. Basketball, they just won another women's soccer national championship. If they had shuffleboard, they'd be the national championships of shuffleboard. Why can't they figure out football? I'm glad they finally tried something. They tried
70 years though. Since Choo Choo Charlie Justice was winning in the 40s. Look at this. I'm gonna throw some Carolina.
I really look forward to the know your opponent segment when we get the Mayo Bowl.
Was that your junior year, Politi? When the Choo Choo guy? Or were you there when Bill Belichick's dad was there?
He's on fire today. I do love that. They're putting out the photo of Bill Belichick in it was one of those 1940s sweater vest with the big buttons, the kind of stuff you'll see. It's not even the Brooklyn hipsters won't even give that to their kids in the thrift shop. This thing, the photo of him, the black and white photo sitting in the bleachers, and look, he's part of the family. Give me a break. Come on.
I did like that Dan Wetzel saying that he couldn't envision Bill Belichick being a child ever. I totally agree. It's a complete shock. The man has been old my entire life. It's hard to see him being, having a childhood. But
that's true. Yeah.
Even when you see the clips of him as as the defense coordinator of the Giants, he's wearing shorts that go past they're halfway down his thighs. It's him and Parcells. Those are iconic too.
He was in his 30s then. Yeah, he was in his 30s, but he was still 70 even then.
He was in the NFL. I did the math. Since 75 to 23, that's 48 years. Yeah. He was in the NFL almost as long as my parents have been alive. That is insane.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I was dying.
His girlfriend is younger than mine.
That's awesome. You're obsessed with that, but that's good. I like it in a good way. Obsessed in a good way. I'm dying. I would love Truth Serum, Greg Schiano, to hear this because obviously they are friends. Became friends. If you don't know it, obviously most people do know, but Steve Belichick was the walk-on long snapper on the team. Greg Schiano, I remember Bill Belichick, a Louisville game in 2011 or 12, one of those years, coming off the bus. I was, standing there before the game, and Bill's like, "Is that Bill Belichick coming off the?" It was one of those moments like, "What the hell is he doing?" He was around the team a lot. They got to know each other. They're kind of kindred spirits, football guys. Bill tried to hire him up in New England when he after the Ohio State thing blew up before Rutgers. That didn't last because I think Greg really recognized he belonged on this level. I would love to know what Greg Schiano told Bill Belichick about this, because it ain't I'll come down, just throw some X's and O's. You're going to beat Clemson. It's not that anymore. It's just not. I mean, your college football coach is not a coach, barely a coach. He's a CEO of a corporation with a million other things that are more important than than trying to, decide whether or not to ice the kicker. Oh, maybe not that one, but you know what I'm talking about. It's just a whole different game. I'd be fascinated to get the truth serum on what Greg Schiano told him about this.
Yeah,
Wow.
if only he could have got him as his defensive coordinator or his son.
Right, exactly.
That's a nice way to tie this 15-minute segment that has nothing to do with Rutgers back to Rutgers. This probably means Steve Belichick will not be the next defensive coordinator at Rutgers. Was unlikely anyway, but to your point, Pat, I think it sounds like he's going to be the head coach in waiting at Carolina. That's part of the stipulations. So
Got to win. You can't. Yeah, if he's leaving, if Bill's leaving at 6-6 with Mayo in his head, Steve's not taking over at 75.
No doubt.
Yeah,
no doubt.
But Rutgers going to have to look at elsewhere for their DC. No Heatherman, no Belichick. Who knows?
Yeah. All right. Anything else?
Also, Joe Rossi. I brought up Joe Rossi the last podcast or 2 podcasts ago. He makes $1.5 million. I don't think he's going to
really. Wow.
Yes, he makes a lot of money at Michigan State. So I think we can also scratch that off the board. I was not aware of that when I just threw him out. I took him out of my hat. It's probably a little too expensive.
Could be. Yeah. All right. Anything else? To wrap it up here.
Women's hoops won last night.
Who did they play?
Beat FDU, I think.
Oh, okay.
Keomi McMiller, 5-star freshman, had her best game, kind of rounding into form, which is good. And I think that's it. Does wrestling wrestle this weekend, Pat?
Yep. Big swing through Pennsylvania and Ohio. It'll be the homecoming for Dylan Shawver, who's an Ohio guy, Big Ten champ for Rutgers. So that'll be a nice storyline there. No big matches per se, but season's going to start picking up soon. So we'll be jumping in on that soon.
And just before we end, we didn't predict what's going to happen in the Seton Hall game. I would like a quick prediction from all of you, just a little.
Oh, yeah. I think it's going to be. It should be an easy 75-60 victory. That's what it should be. So that's what I think it will be.
I think the offense of Rutgers is just so much better. I think the first one they're going to get to 70, and that's it, right? I can see them this being a decisive win. So I know you won't. So go ahead.
I agree. I think they'll muck it up in the first half. I think Seton Hall is going to do what they can to keep this becoming a nail biter. I don't think it's going to be another 45-43 game like it was 2 years ago. I think Rutgers has too much offensive firepower, and Seton Hall doesn't have the shooters to keep up. I really don't see that. So even if Rutgers plays like a C game, I have a hard time seeing them losing this. So I agree with you guys. I think 75-60 is a nice score. I'll be a little different. I'll say 71-59. So
the Hardwood Classic will be there. New Jersey shaped trophy. Cool trophy. We'll see who gets to hold it up on the court. We'll see if Ace Bailey says some funny stuff when it's over, like he does. Kid has no filter. Love him to death.
He did guarantee a W. You saw that? He guaranteed a
W. I love it, man. Yeah. And then we'll be back next week also to talk about the bowl and everything else going on. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Rutgers Rant. To participate in the conversation and receive live updates about the Scarlet Knights directly to your phone, sign up at nj.com/insider.